Hello and welcome to this short webinar on risk management for pastors. This is going to be part one in a series. My name is David Fournier. I'm the Vice President for Client Care at Adventist Risk Management. I'm glad you've taken the time to spend on this topic, and I hope that you'll find the information helpful and useful to you in your ministry. I want to share a quick video with you just as we get started to give you a little bit of perspective of what the Ministry of Risk Management means within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. For those of us who work at Adventist Risk Management, we do look at our role and our service as a ministry. And I hope that you'll actually partner with us and join us in this ministry as we partner with you in your ministry. Let's talk a little bit about the role of leaders within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, within our ministries. Um, I want to challenge you to think of your role as a leader, as a minister, as a shepherd of your flock, as a leadership role. And with that comes responsibility. You know, you think of the analogy of a shepherd and a flock. There's certainly a role there for the shepherd in protecting, in keeping the sheep safe in the right direction, within the confines of the pen at night, that they would be following them to safe pastures, and that they're drinking from water that's um, clean and pure, rather than something that has been corrupted. And that, of course, is a fantastic analogy we use in many of our illustrations, but it also has a strong connection to the idea of looking out to the life safety of those who are part of our congregations as members, our ministry leaders, our volunteers, and those that we're seeking to reach in our communities, whether that is, community children attending a VBS, or um, our children in our Pathfinder clubs or adventurer clubs, or people attending an evangelistic series, and learning about the whole plan of salvation and meeting Christ in a meaningful way for the first time. We should care about each one of these people's uh, well-being, and be concerned that they experience a safe environment when they are engaging with us, certainly on our property, but in all of our activities. The way that the laws and structure in our country, and most countries and jurisdictions works, is that if you're conducting an activity, if people are on your property, you do have some duties. You have a duty to protect. When there are children participating in an activity at your church, whether it's Pathfinders or Sabbath school, they are usually given into your care, custody, and control. So there's a ministry leader who is leading that activity. The parents are engaged in their activity, uh, usually not in the same place. So you often will receive something called care, custody, and control, which means there's heightened responsibility because there's an expectation that when they leave their child in that ministry leader's care, that child will be cared for, that somebody's going to have a sense of what risks may take place, help to ensure that those are minimized. Very important for us, particularly in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, to understand that each ministry leader, each pastor really does represent something much larger than yourself. Of course, you're probably thinking already about the much, much larger sense in which we are a representative of the kingdom of God, but also in a much smaller capacity. This is also true of representing a larger organization here on earth. So as a pastor of a local church, you are seen as a representative of that congregation or congregations in many cases. Many of our pastors are serving multiple congregations, but each of these congregations is organized in a conference, and the conference is the lowest legal entity that the church recognizes in its structure. So as an organization, you are representing and serving as a representative of the conference, the whole conference. So the actions that you take, the decisions you make, are really um, being made for, on behalf of, that whole conference organization, which is of course comprised of all of the churches in the conference, all of the schools, the camp, the academy, if that conference has an academy. So all of the organization is one organization. And what that means from a liability standpoint is that you really do represent something quite large. Even if you are working in a smaller community with a small congregation, you do represent a large organization. What that means in very practical terms as well is that if your activities, your choices, or something that is done by one of the membership acting for the church it causes a lawsuit or some sort of action against the organization, that lawsuit is going to be brought against the conference as a whole. Um, so unlike some of our colleagues who are more congregationalist in structure, whereas perhaps a congregationalist church may you know get a lawsuit that they are unable to pay. Perhaps they have some insurance limits. The insurance limit is quickly exhausted. Their assets are now on the line to pay the settlement or the judgment against them. And perhaps the judgment, in fact, exhausts the assets that they have. They simply go bankrupt. They sell the assets, what have you, to meet that demand. That organization, as small as it is, ceases to exist. And they all go down the street, they call themselves something new, and they start a new church, a new congregation. Well, our organization is organized much more effectively and in some ways in a more complex but proactive way because we are working as larger groups. So as a whole conference, it's you have to understand that the organization you're representing is much, much larger and cannot be so easily dissolved, and you certainly wouldn't want to expose that whole organization to that kind of potential injury. So really important that we understand we are part of and we do represent something larger than ourselves. And so as we act, we should act in harmony, in cooperation with the whole organization that we represent. Uh, our organizations tend to have good and clear policies, guidelines, and resources. Certainly, there should be good communication and information sharing that take place whenever we're engaged in any activity. If you're considering, some sort of partnership or that might involve a contract, definitely bring that into cooperation with your conference organization. Expectations, and this is where a lot of our liabilities come from, is from expectations, and these are usually quite reasonable if viewed objectively before a loss takes place. Parents, for example, expect that when they drop their kids off for a church event, that the people taking care of the kids, who have their care, custody, and control, to use that term again, are going to provide proper care, supervision. If they're going to be traveling in a vehicle, that it's going to be safe, that somebody will be maintaining that vehicle, that the driver selected is a good driver with sound judgment, not somebody who has, uh, you know, a bad record and bad practices. Extra care should be taken in everything that we do, because that is the expectation. And when we look at the overall legal environment in certainly our country right now, churches are held to a high standard. And to be honest, I think that's fair. We stand on a firm foundation. We believe in morality, that it comes from a solid source from our Creator. We believe in a God that cares about life safety, cares about each person. Um, this should be a priority of ours as well, as His children and as His ambassadors to this world. So something for us to take seriously and really make part of our ministry. I think of Romans 13, 9 through 10. Let's read this together. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be, are summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. And love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So there, a clear injunction that we should be uh, caring about the people in our congregation and in our community. I think of also the golden rule, and this one has broad application. A new command I give you: love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Here, Jesus is really speaking in response to the golden rule, and sharing that he has a much broader, bigger understanding of this for us to consider. It's no longer simply do unto others as you would have them do to you. It is, in fact, I want you to actually love one another, love other people, which means a deeper caring for their well-being. So let's look at risk management. Let's get practical, and we're going to dive into some details here today, and then we're going to outline what the next elements of our series is going to be all about. And those elements are going to be extremely practical. But here's an overview of risk management principles in general. It is really built on these three pillars: risk identification, risk control, and risk financing. Risk identification is so critical. It's where everything begins. It's all about understanding what risks we actually have, what can we control, what are we really dealing with. The analogy I sometimes give is that of a group that wants to go rock climbing. Uh, and it's a good analogy because so many of our youth groups do like to engage in this activity. So understanding what that risk is in the first place, and there's a really broad potential activity and risk involved with rock climbing, because there's rock climbing and then there's rock climbing. There's rock climbing where you take your inexperienced group out and you have, you know, a volunteer leader who did this in college and just really loves doing rock climbing, and they take their vehicle out and travel out into the wilderness where they know there's an escarpment of some sort, and um, you know, 2 hours out into the middle of nowhere, they hike for another 45 minutes till they get to this escarpment, and they do some rock climbing there as best they can. Okay, that's probably an extreme scenario. On the other end of that is, what if we were to also consider rock climbing where you actually contract with a local facility that offers that service, those services. They may require you to sign some waivers, but they also have their own insurance, and they provide trained, certified professionals as well as top quality equipment in a controlled environment, which is perhaps only about 5 minutes away from emergency responders if somebody did have some sort of an accident. So quickly we can see there is such a difference in risk between one of those scenarios and the other. One of those, you're far from emergency assistance. The supervision is sketchy at best. That, that person may be an enthusiast, they may have some good experiences with it, but what qualifications do they really have? Um, and not to mention that it's just sort of an uncontrolled, unknown environment. The equipment is, you know, well, who knows what it is? And is it adequate to the task? Does it fit correctly? Does that supervisor know how to make sure that it is correct? So that's really starting to understand the risk. Another question that we should ask at that point is, if we go engage in this activity, are we as an organization covered through our insurance policy? And so the answer to that question is, if you have your insurance with Adventist Risk Management, coverage can be attained, but there is an additional endorsement necessary to provide coverage for your organization to engage in rock climbing and a number of other activities, high-risk activities as well. So it can be obtained, but it's not automatically there. So if you just go off into the forest doing this, you're not covered for that automatically. Risk, let's look at the next section, risk control. So what could we do to minimize, avoid, or control this risk? Well, I think you've already picked up on some of the opportunities in our two examples. If we were to choose to go to a facility where there's professionals, there's people checking the equipment, it's high quality equipment, where they have an insurance policy that would respond for their actions, making sure that our insurance policy is in place. Those are all things we can do to ensure that our risk is controlled. Whereas going out into the middle of nowhere with unqualified supervision, far from emergency help, is a really uncontrolled scenario. Risk financing, the last step, is, okay, that's your insurance part. How much of this do we insure? In insurance, there's also the element of retention. If you have an automobile insurance policy or a homeowner's or renter's insurance policy, you probably have something called a deductible. That's also known in the insurance lingo as a retention. That is your participation, your interest in making sure that losses do not happen. It means you're going to participate and you're going to feel some of the hurt when something bad happens, financially speaking. And as part of the whole risk financing component, you're also looking to transfer risk whenever possible, which means in the case of working with an outside organization to provide these services, uh, their insurance should respond to their negligence. So if they do something wrong, their insurance needs to respond to that. And you should be able to ask them for proof of insurance and adequate limits, and that is not removing your own negligence for what you do wrong, but it certainly means that if they're in charge of the activity, the hook is going to be stronger into them than it is into your organization. So those are ways that we can begin to understand the risk, control the risk, and finance the risk. I want to tell you a little bit about the Seventh-day Adventist World Church's excess liability program. The excess liability program is uh, it is exactly what it sounds like. You may be familiar with umbrella policies, where you have a primary policy which has your regular limits, and then on top of that, because you need some higher limits from time to time, depending on what you do, you may have an umbrella policy which provides higher limits for a broad category of risks. Uh, so that's what the church's excess policy program does. It takes the primary limits and it adds additional limits above and beyond. Because keep in mind, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a very organized and connected organization. And even a very small conference is still a very large organization from a assets, personnel, and total insured value standpoint. So over the last many years, the church has been able to secure its higher limits of insurance at very, very competitive and reasonable rates. We place this in multiple layers out in the market every year. We do not retain most of the high levels of insurance limits. However, in the last 10 years or so, we are starting to see losses that are piercing into those high limit areas. So above and beyond the 1 million at the primary level or 3 million at the primary level, it's piercing up into the 5, 10. In fact, we have had losses above $20 million in recent years as well. So what does that mean? What that means is that we went from having a positive, healthy relationship with our carriers who provide those limits for us to a less healthy scenario. So the numbers that you see up on the screen right now, in 2016, the Seventh-day Adventist Church around the world had a 500% loss ratio. What does loss ratio mean? It means that for every dollar that we paid in premium, the insurance companies paid out $5 in losses. And if you're familiar with business or the insurance industry at all, that becomes a pretty unsustainable relationship. That is something the insurance companies are just not willing to continue doing because they're operating at a significant loss, and they're not in the business of operating at a loss. So they're looking to change that relationship. So what can we do to change that relationship? Well, the first thing that should be on our minds is, of course, changing our loss experience. And the second thing we can do to help control the rising cost of this insurance product, the excess liability product, is of course to sell ourselves as a good risk. Well, certainly our loss ratio is not telling that story right now. We have some terrible losses, but what we do about it is can be compelling. The steps that we take, we can really tell the market, look at all that we're doing to ensure that we don't have those types of high losses going forward. So we have been pursuing that. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. In the meantime, however, in 2017, our loss ratio actually increased to 650%. So that's quite high. Most healthy insurance loss ratios are going to be, of course, less than 100%, meaning that for every dollar that we pay in premium, the insurance company is paying out less than that amount in losses. So right now we're paying $1 and they're paying $6.50 in losses. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about the nature of those losses, what has been going on. And I will not be discussing specific cases. I don't typically speak about specific losses because when those losses close, they are typically, we have to sign non-disclosure agreements. There's typically death and injury involved, so people are sensitive to keeping that story to themselves to some degree. However, in general, the trends that we've seen include what I mentioned already: unqualified supervision. Several of the large claims were due to 15 passenger vans with multiple deaths, multiple injuries. Some of the cases involved hiring unqualified individuals. So rather than following our own protocols and contracting with somebody who has the right skills, insurance, equipment, and expertise to do something, we hire someone who needs the work and who is incredibly inexpensive. That person then injures themselves, and because they're not actually a contractor, they don't actually own a business, they don't have any insurance, all of it falls on the church to respond to their loss. We have several incidents where people did work involving either chainsaws or trimming limbs near power lines and that kind of thing, and those people are either burned and permanently damaged for the rest of their lives, or are very close to passing away at this point due to their injuries. Really sad stories, each of these, and largely avoidable based on the decisions that we made. We did know better as a church. We had better protocols in place. We had better choices to make. The last one there on the list says $40 in equipment, and really the largest loss that the church has ever paid out could have been avoided by spending about $40 in equipment. It was, in my view, certainly unnecessary, the loss that happened there. And the person who was hurt will not be the same and will need extremely intensive care for the rest of their life. So I really do think we can do better as a church. The North American Division Risk Management Committee asked Adventist Risk Management if we could develop some sort of plan, some initiatives that would really set us on a new course of taking our losses more seriously as a group, as a church, and what could we practically do to really change our experience. So in the fall of 2016, we presented a proposal, and the church did accept the proposal, and with some enthusiasm, actually. And so I want to share a little bit about what that is about with you, because I think some of it is information that you can really be a strong partner at your church, in your churches and schools, to really help make these take place. The first thing is we asked for, you see there, it says risk management committees. And what we're talking about here is really engagement with leadership. Many of our leaders have really taken the approach of delegating this area of risk management and insurance to an individual. And certainly you do need to have a person who spearheads and takes care of these activities. And that's going to be true at the conference level and certainly at the church level as well. However, this does not mean that leadership can ignore risk management issues. It must be part of our culture that we care for people and we care for their safety and experience. And that needs to be a priority of top leadership and leadership at every level and in every aspect of ministry. So that first initiative is really about engaging with leadership, giving leadership information about what's going on, as well as ensuring that effective plans and policies are in place to move things forward. I'll talk a little bit more in our next webinar on how you can make that a reality in your local church. The next one here is removing 15 passenger vans. It became clear that that was a particular area of need through multiple cases and certainly multiple deaths and injuries. We have known for years that this was a problem. We've even preached for years. There are many church organizations that have, you know, conferences that have said no 15 passenger vans at all for years, and yet they still keep popping up here and there. And amongst some groups, they are very, very popular and widely used. And even where they are not owned, they are often rented or borrowed, which solves nothing from a liability standpoint with the church. So removing 15 passenger vans was a high priority, is a high priority, and continues to be a high priority. We want to watch out for these, particularly at our youth events, Pathfinders, and they still seem to be popping up on a regular basis. The next initiative is facility inspections. You know, setting a safety officer, conducting a facility inspection is great, or having Adventist Risk Management or one of our partners come out and do some sort of survey or an inspection of a property is very, very helpful, but it is only as helpful as the actions that take place from the recommendations that are made. So information is only potentially helpful if we then do something about that information. So that initiative is really about giving a follow through and accountability model so that we will actually present recommendations to whatever group or board needs to take action in order to make the change actually take place. And lastly, here on our list, we have emergency planning. We've been promoting Safety Sabbath as sort of a day of emphasis, but we're really looking for churches across North America and around the world to really begin to do drills on a regular basis where they are engaging their people. People will begin to understand how they're going to react in a given scenario, so that you're not figuring it out when that scenario is taking place. Really, really important for us to get going on that. It has traditionally been an area that many churches have just chosen to ignore entirely. And the church is really one of the only places that people have chosen to ignore emergency planning the way we have. And we really need to move things in a better direction on that. And I'm really excited to say that particularly this year, we have vastly increased participation with our Safety Sabbath Day. You can learn more about that at adventistrisk.org, where you can download all the resources you need to plan and execute, whether it's fire drills or active shooter planning, or I think there's information for a missing child scenario, and even for earthquakes, for those zones that experience earthquakes. We will continue to develop more focused resources on other risks as well in the future. In 2018, we felt good about the start that took place in 2017, but there was still a sense that we were still getting the church's attention, and there were many who were just not engaged in this concept yet. So we again wanted to emphasize particularly leadership in our initiatives for 2018. So one of the areas that we emphasized in 2017 was engaging with leadership, particularly at the conference level. And now in 2018, we hope to continue that with equipping and engaging with pastors. One of the reasons why we're having this webinar right now. So there is information that we've shared out earlier in the year, and we will be sharing more information as we go forward. Another area of interest for us in 2018 is in preparation for the upcoming International Camporee in Oshkosh, and really helping to get our heads around upgrading, updating, reviewing our Pathfinder leadership knowledge and practices, making sure that our Pathfinder leaders are effectively prepared for that event, and that the practices and policies and processes that they're following are up to date and actually make sense and don't have any lapses of logic in them. And then continuing again the facility inspection priority and emergency planning. So I hope you'll join with us on those. We will dive deeper into those in the next webinars. So one of the primary resources that I want to share with you just before we close is you will not be asked to spearhead this yourself as a pastor. You have lots to do. In fact, you have all of the things to do. You have every ministry to care for. But we do ask that you make the safety and risk management area a priority, and delegate and find somebody to be the spearhead for that in your congregation. What would that person be doing for you? What do you want to see taking place in that space? You want that safety officer, again, to be somebody who can collaborate with people, and they're going to want to engage in several activities. They can be the person to help spearhead your emergency plan and planning and drills and that kind of stuff. They might be really spearheading the regular self-inspections, where we have resources for this again on our website, where they can really walk through the mother's room and the Sabbath school rooms, the kitchen, the sanctuary, and we have little checklists that they can use to really evaluate that space for risks and come back with a sense of, oh, you know what, this is a missing piece, or all of our fire extinguishers are out of date and need to be serviced, or our exit lights are have all burned out. Our exit plan needs to be updated, or hey, I found we have a whole bunch of stuff stored in the hallway blocking an exit. This is the kind of stuff that needs to have somebody who stays on top of it. And they can also help spearhead any accident investigation, making sure that you know and are documenting whatever may be taking place. Even if it's not a claim, you should have some sort of record of what's going on in case it turns into something more later, and just to help you with your planning. And also, this person could really be helpful in coordinating with the maintenance program. In fact, both in the liability and the property insurance loss areas, the most frequent losses in both of those areas are due to lack of maintenance. So it's an area that costs the church a lot of money just by not being engaged in that process. How do we really effectively make this person someone who can influence across ministries? I recommend setting up a risk management committee at your congregation. This is going to look different depending on the size and unique needs of your church. The way I've witnessed it work successfully is when the pastor made it a priority, helped to get it started, and continued to give support, but allowed that safety officer then to take the agenda forward and lead out in actually executing some of the projects like the emergency planning and whatnot. This is a great opportunity to really align your safety person with your deacon, or your Pathfinder director or Sabbath school leaders, people who are engaged in a lot of the activities of the church, who need to have a strong connection with, the risk management mentality and information and resources, which is critical. Lastly, here we just want to look at what we have coming up next. Our next webinar will focus on physical plant and life safety. So we're going to go through some of the details I sort of hinted at already there, dealing with what you should see going on in that area for physical plant and life safety. Then we're going to dive into child protection, and lastly into activity planning and transportation. And that's going to do it for the upcoming series of webinars. I hope to do another series for pastors, specifically again later in the year, probably in the fall, late summer, fall, where we could focus on some deeper issues yet. But I wanted to get this one, which will really give us some practical tools and an awareness going on now, so that you can at least see, wait, do I have a safety officer at this congregation? Is there, if I want to look and see if something positive is happening there, what would I be looking for? Well, hopefully this series will give you those tools, and then we can deeper dive into some deeper liability issues and negligence and contracts and stuff like that later on in the next series. I thank you for joining me today. Thank you for taking the time to make risk management a priority in your ministry. Thank you for caring for our church and our people, and most importantly, for those people in our community where we might be a blessing. So I appreciate the ministry that you do, and God bless. Thank you for spending the time today. Goodbye.